The views expressed on this broadcast of Step by Step Towards Emotional Sobriety with Dr. Alan Berger do not necessarily reflect those of Take 12 Radio, KHLT Recovery Broadcasting, or our affiliates. Take 12 Radio and KHLT Recovery Broadcasting are not affiliated with any particular 12-step fellowship. And now, here's your host, Dr. Alan Berger, and the Monty Man.
Well, greetings, friends and recovery family, all of those of you who have joined us on another fine episode of Step by Step Towards Emotional Sobriety with our friend Dr. Alan Berger. Welcome, Dr. Berger.
Well, thank you, Monty, and I want to take a minute to apologize to all our listeners that I have just been unavailable here for quite some time, and I'm so glad to be back with everybody, and looking forward to a great show tonight.
Well, we know that all you've been doing is been out in the middle of an ocean, or out in the middle of a lake on a rowboat, just not doing anything. You are a busy man. Yeah, I know. I want everybody to know that the reason this guy is so busy is because of the tremendous amount of work he does, because he cares about you guys. And there's the big book of Alcoholics, or the literature. Some of the literature in Alcoholics Anonymous, for instance, talks about how there's not always people that can dedicate all their time to this cause, but there are a few, and Dr. Berger is one of them, and we're so grateful that he is, and so thankful for this show. I want to remind everybody, by the way, that the cartoon caption contest, which is going to be over in December, we may continue it next year. I don't know yet. It's been a pretty big success so far. The cartoon caption contest, the grand prize drawing is going to be held in December, and Dr. Berger has graciously donated some of his books to the grand prize. And we got a bunch of stuff. We got some books on AA history by Dick B. We got a book called the 12 Tins, which is a tremendous story of a woman who went through tremendous abuse, and her spouse filmed it, and then she discovered it later, and how she recovered through that terrible event. We've got a book called On the Outside Looking In by Kathy Carnero, who's going to be on the show this next Friday, by the way. It just a whole bunch of, we got some recovery music, we got some posters, we got all sorts of goodies. So
yeah, what a great goodie basket.
Yeah, and it'll be sent out to the winner just in time for them they can split up the basket and give away this stuff as presents for Christmas. Christmas is a hard time for some people financially, and they struggle to know what to give their other friends and families that are in recovery or advocates of, and here's a great opportunity to get a whole bunch of goodies that they can use as presents or keep for themselves. So, Dr. Berger, what are we going to be talking about on this show?
Well, what I wanted to do with this show, Monty, is to talk about emotional sobriety in the steps, and I specifically want to focus on the 12 and 12.
Oh, okay,
so
great.
I think that, I was currently in Vermont, and I was speaking at New England Professional Group, the recovery conference, and I was up there with Fred Holmquist, who's the director of the lodge at Dan Anderson Renewal Center at Hazleton. And Fred really said something that really, really helped put this thing in a context to me, and it's a funny story, and I'll share it with our listeners. As I'm flying out to Vermont, I'm on the plane and I'm working on my presentation on emotional sobriety. And I get there, and Fred's going. Fred speaks from 8 to 9:30. Then there's a break, and I come on at 10. And Fred's talking about emotional sobriety and talking about the 12 and 12. And he says, originally, when the Big Book was written, they were all concerned with getting sober. Mm-hmm. With chemical sobriety. They were dealing with alcoholism. They wanted to stay sober. They didn't want to drink again. So the Big Book is really the template that they use to help them establish their initial, what he called chemical sobriety, which made total sense to me. And then he coined a phrase that I think is so good, Monty. He says that 12 and 12 came along to address what he called sober suffering. Is that now, as people were living sober, they were running up against these issues that we've been talking about in our show, this emotional dependency and how it wreaks havoc in our life and in our relationships. And the 12 and 12 was written to deepen and expand what was talked about originally in the big book, but now with more of an eye towards emotional sobriety. And when Fred said that, it just totally congealed what I had been doing on the plane, because I went back into the 12 and 12 as I was flying out to Vermont, and I was taking passages from the 12 and 12 that related to this whole issue of emotional sobriety. So that's what we're going to do today. We're going to be talking about what some of those passages I pulled out of the book, what they are, and help people see how this emotional sobriety is really at the heart of our program.
Wonderful, wonderful. Because so many people, we know that there's lots and lots of people that never even cracked the big book, let alone the 12 and 12. So this is wonderful.
No, this is great. In the 12 and 12, just to remind our listeners, some of them know this, some may not, it was written 17 years after the big book was written. So this is now based on 17 years of experience of trying to live clean and sober. So here's the first thing I did. I started, and I'm going to go back because Fred says there's a lot of good stuff in steps 1 and 2 about this too. But the first thing that jumped out at me when I was going through my 12 and 12 was this quote from step 3. It says, the more we become willing to depend on a higher power, the more independent we actually are. Therefore, dependence as AA practices it is really the means of gaining true independence of spirit.
Amen. You betcha. That is a great statement.
Isn't that a powerful quote? I mean, let's really unpack it here for a minute. So what they're saying here is that when I connect to a power greater than myself, and, a lot of the way I talk about it to people is connecting with the true self, which I think is a spiritual self, a God self, however you want to talk about it.
Yeah, you bet.
Is when we connect to that, now I'm able to develop some real autonomy in my life. So the way that I've been thinking about this is that emotional sobriety is really the result of this true independence of the spirit. Because when I'm holding on to myself, when I'm keeping my own shape, I have true independence of my spirit. I am not allowing my spirit and the quality of that and the nature of that to be determined by what other people are doing. It's being determined by what I'm doing in my relationship with myself and with my higher power.
And so many people miss that. We dance around that a lot in our 12-step support meetings. We're almost afraid to talk about it, and yet that is so key in learning how to be free from the bondage of our false self.
So true. So now look at this. Listen to this. This is another quote from the step 3. It goes, quote, let's examine for a moment this idea of dependence at the level of everyday living. In this area, it is startling to discover how dependent we really are and how unconscious of that dependence we are. Well, this is the thing you and I have been talking about throughout this show, Monty, is that this dependence is really woven into the very fabric of our lives. We are all much more dependent than any of us would care to admit.
Sure.
And what we start to see is that we didn't want to think of ourselves that way. There's a lot of forces that go into our resistance to look at ourselves and to admit and to own up to our dependence.
So what I'm hearing...
So this is how we're unconscious of it. You see, this is what Bill pointed out, is that until we can start to see that we've had the cart before the horse, that our life isn't really going to change.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So dependence on a power greater than ourselves to restore us to sanity, to quote a famous statement, is really independence. But
that's what we're really talking about, is that when we start to, if you will, in what I would call it, we could say it dependence on a power greater than ourselves. What I would say is to allow that power greater than ourselves to be the center and core of our life.
There you go. Let me ask you a question. Let me ask you a question, Dr. Berger. Why are people so afraid to, we talk about to be truly independent, to truly be free, we have to have strong boundaries. In this, we allow this power to be our core. So to be truly independent means to be dependent in the purest sense of the word. Why are people so afraid of being accountable, of having boundaries? Why are we so afraid of that?
Well, I think that there's a couple thoughts that come to my mind in terms of what is it that makes it hard for us. And I think, first of all, I don't think a lot of people feel very worthy of setting boundaries.
Okay.
And they're afraid that if I set my boundaries, you're not going to like me, you're not going to love me, you're not going to accept me, I'm no longer going to belong. And so I think that a lot of what we've done in our life is to somehow deal with our fear of being rejected. Brene Brown, who's very, very popular right now, and deservedly so, because she talks about this issue of vulnerability. And vulnerability involves a risk. And the risk that it involves is getting rejected.
Right.
Well, the pain is not over the rejection that we're going to get from someone else. Yeah, that's going to hurt, and it's going to cause us some necessary grief. But the bigger part is when someone else rejects us, it just reminds us of how we've rejected ourselves. So what happens is there's two against nobody. They reject, we reject ourselves, we turn on ourselves, we abandon ourselves, and now we are left in quite a pickle.
So we believe the lie. We believe the lie. If somebody says, well, I just don't think you measure up, we believe it.
Exactly. See, we let their limited perception define who we are. And see, that's the problem with this emotional dependency, is when I'm dependent on you, now you have all the power to determine how I feel about myself. The more I hold on to my own shape, the less power you have to change my feelings towards myself.
Boy, but we say all the time, well, I don't care what other people think about me. And you know what? When I hear people say that, I don't believe it.
It's dishonest, man. Yeah. It's just we're not being. So what we can learn from this passage I just read is that for the most part, our emotional dependency is unconscious. It operates outside of our awareness. But yet it is living us. This force, this is what Freud used to say. This is what Freud said. He's quoted as saying, we are being lived by the forces within ourselves. This emotional dependency is controlling so much of what's happening in our life. And if we're going to really mature and grow up, we've got to now start to face this.
So in being able to be aware of this unconscious dependency, does that involve the steps?
Yeah, it sure does. Well, that's what we're saying here. And step 3 is when we're making this decision to turn our will and our lives over to the care of God as we understand them, right?
Yeah.
What I call this step is about making a commitment to a new way of life. Making a commitment to live our life based on now a true self instead of the false self. So let's say that we're going to take this idea that our true self is a spiritual self, and it's really the portal to connect us to a higher power. If I am not in touch with and honoring my true self, I'm disconnected. When I go to my false self, I'm disconnected from the spirit, right?
Right.
When I'm my true self, I'm allowing the spirit to move my life.
Yeah,
right.
Right on.
So that's how I understand it from my psychological, perception.
It makes sense.
From the way I think that Scott Peck talked about it, too, in The Road Less Traveled.
And so when we
that
do
God
this,
talks to us through our unconscious. I mean,
when we do what you're talking about here, then that enables us with power to go to step 4.
yeah.
Yeah.
It does. Well, let me read another quote from step 3. So
Yes.
we see how it builds on understanding this resistance to look at it. It says, we realize, this is a quote now from step 3, we realize that the word dependence is as distasteful to many psychiatrists and psychologists as it is to alcoholics. Like our professional friends, we too are aware that there are wrong forms of dependence. So what are we talking about? What are these wrong forms of dependence? Well, obviously our dependence on alcohol and other drugs created a heck of a problem in our life.
Right.
But also our dependence on other people for our validation.
Yeah.
Our dependence on other people to make us feel okay. Our dependence on other people to go along with what we want from them so that somehow validates our worth. So here we start to see that, my God, in step 3, we're already talking about a healthier way to be in the world, a way to be in the world where we maintain our balance and our humility. So what I say is that being emotionally dependent is shameful and therefore disowned. See, no one in our society really wants to admit how dependent they are.
That's right.
Because our society is very individualistic, right?
Yeah.
It's you're supposed to be independent. You're supposed to take care of yourself. It's all these things. And anywhere that dependency shows up, we're going to feel bad about ourselves. So we're going to feel shameful, and therefore we're going to go ahead and disown it.
And yet everything about our society today, from the media to the songs we hear to the movies we watch, to the things we read, all scream in an underlying tone, I want you to be dependent on me. Yeah. And so...
Well, that's the problem now. Now you're coming to another thing, Monty, that I think brings up a really good point, is our society has turned based love on dependence. And this is a terrible, terrible thing that's happened. Because in our society, if you listen to all these songs, they are based on so much emotional dependency.
Oh.
I can't live without you. You've made my life. All these things that says, I am nothing without you.
Yeah.
And what we know, that mature love does not replace who we are. It's integrity, or union with the preservation of integrity. It's coming together without losing yourself. And all these songs we hear on the radio are about losing yourself.
Yeah. Yeah. Say that again. You said it before. Union with the preservation
of integrity. Union
of
with the preservation
integrity.
of integrity. So this emotional dependency has to be dealt with. This is what Dr. Jerry Greenwald said. He goes, it is not possible for me to relate to others intimately and allow and enjoy their full expression of themselves if I have not discovered how to do this for myself.
That's right. Yeah.
I cannot have a full expression of myself and enjoy myself if I'm over-worried about you and how you're going to react to me. Then I'm going to censor myself. I just did a session tonight where this very, very sincere and vulnerable woman has been in this relationship with this guy for, I think it's going on 5 years now. And she loves him very much. I mean, she's very, very committed to this relationship. They both started it out, or the relationship started out with them being madly in love. He was just coming out of a very, very ugly divorce. And, he was saying, I just want to spend my life with you. You're the love of my life. I can't wait till we move in together. And then through a series of different experiences that he had, he started to realize, I kind of like living with my kids and not having to deal with someone else. So he kind of cooled his jets on the relationship. Well, she's hung in there because she's really crazy about the guy.
Mm-hmm.
But what she keeps hoping, her emotional dependency is, I hope you're going to take care of me because I feel bad. Now, after 5 years, he still hasn't owned up to the fact that he's with her and really made that a public statement with his kids, with his ex-wife, with
really
different
wow
people. Yeah. So she's now coming to therapy and she's getting a little healthier and she's saying, I just don't like living this way. I feel bad. I feel like I'm a mistress, and I feel I'm more worthy of that than this. So she says that to him, and she's waiting for him to respond. And I said, you're sitting there waiting for him to listen to you on this, aren't you? She goes, yeah, I want him to do something about it. I said, well, maybe that will happen once you listen to yourself. She goes, what do you mean? I go, he's not listening to you because you're not listening to yourself. How am I not listening to myself? Well, if that's important to you and it's not happening, then you don't see him.
Exactly. You know what?
You don't keep telling him to do something about it when you're not doing something about it.
One of the things, my wife and I sit down and we like to watch shows, and I won't name which ones, but we like to watch shows where couples are being interviewed and there's stuff going on. And Marcia's always saying to me, she goes, why are you staying with that guy? Or why are you staying with the guy? What are you doing? You're not even married. You're playing house. There's no commitment at all, and you're wondering why, and you've been doing it for years. Why are you staying there? And I think one of the answers to that is what you've talked about so much. We become almost hopeful that our emotional dependency will blossom into something that's of truth, and it can't.
Right. Yeah. That's a great way to say it. We're hopeful that our emotional dependency will blossom into something that's true. Yeah.
Yeah. And if it's emotional dependency on somebody else's behavior to be okay with myself, it will never come true.
Yeah.
Oh, my gosh. People are in trouble, Dr. Berger.
Yeah, no, there's no question about that. There's no question about that.
Hey, listen, we're going to take a short break, and when we come back, what are we going to tackle here?
Well, we're going to look at how this plays out in step 4 a little bit.
Okay.
And then we'll wrap up tonight's show, and we'll pick up step 5 and 6 in the next show.
All right, folks, don't go away. More with Dr. Alan Berger, step by step towards emotional sobriety, when we return.
Treatment does not have to be voluntary to be effective. Sanctions and enticements from family, employment settings, and or the criminal justice system can significantly increase treatment entry, retention rates, and the ultimate success of drug treatment interventions. Freedom Interventions provides the direction necessary to get the help of an addiction intervention. We assist with selecting a treatment experience appropriate for the unique needs of your addicted loved one, and provide 6 months of ongoing support to ensure success for everyone involved in the transition into real life. If you know someone who needs a life-saving intervention, visit freedominterventions.com or call 888-762-7557. That's 888-762-7557. Freedom Interventions, providing drug and alcohol interventions and a continuum of care services to clients and their families.
Addiction is the #1 health threat in our world today. It affects more people than any other malady, and yet the solution to this health crisis gets the least amount of attention. May I introduce to you a media outlet that's doing something about that. KHLT Recovery Broadcasting, home of the Take 12 Recovery radio shows, is the world's only faith-based radio station broadcasting 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, with the solution to the addiction problem. Visit take12radio.com for recovery talk and positive music, and be ready to be set free from a seemingly hopeless state of mind and body. That's take12radio.com on your internet dial. Okay, and we return, and of course, Dr. Alan Berger is on the line with us for this episode of Step by Step Towards Emotional Sobriety, and we've been talking about emotional sobriety and the steps, and we just finished up talking about step 3, And now we're going to look at step 4 and how this all works together.
Yeah, so what we're doing is we're really building on this whole idea of understanding the steps and how they relate to this emotional sobriety issue. So here's the purpose of step 4. Step 4 is our rigorous and painstaking effort to discover what these liabilities in each of us have been. We want to find out when and where our natural desires have warped us.
Mm.
We wish to look squarely at the unhappiness that this has caused others and ourselves. So this is a real call to action, right, to take an emotional inventory. Now, what we're doing here is when we talk about how our natural desires have warped us, what we're looking at is that it's okay to want to please someone and cooperate with them.
Sure.
There's nothing wrong with that when that's balanced with your individuality. But what happened to us is we got lopsided. Other people became too important. We didn't know how to keep ourselves at the same level of importance that we were making other people. So we ended up taking all kinds of psychological maneuvers to try to balance that again, and none of them worked. That's the bottom line. That's why we all have so much difficulty. So our natural desire to cooperate, to please another person, which is a healthy thing, if it's in balance, ends up warping us when we become dependent on the other person for our validation, for our self-esteem.
So that's part of this misdirected instinct stuff.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So let's go back to the other part. It says nearly every serious emotional problem can be seen as a case of misdirected instinct.
Right.
It's just what you said. When that happens, our great natural assets, the instincts have turned into physical and mental liabilities.
Yes.
So what happens is the instinct, let's say, for self-survival, now, because we've overemphasized our desire to please and cooperate, and we now are emotionally dependent, our survival feels like it depends on getting that other person's validation.
Right. Which you may never get.
Which you may or may not. If you do get it, the problem is it reinforces the idea you need it. And if you don't get it, you're probably better off, because then it gives you an opportunity to start growing up and standing on your own 2 feet.
Yeah. It's almost like chasing a bag of dope.
Yeah.
You get it. You get the validation once, and then you keep chasing after it.
And that's many of us are validation junkies in the program.
Oh, that's a good
one. And we're looking for someone else to validate us so that we can feel good about ourselves. So we pitch with an ear on, how great did I sound? So we get people to come up and say, man, you really, really got this program, don't you? It's stuff like that. Look, I'm guilty of it too, man. Each of us are.
We love that.
But what I want people to know is that each and every person struggles with balancing togetherness and individuality in our lives. I mean, that is a struggle for everyone. And we usually fall out of one side of that better than the other. We either become people pleasers or we become so self-centered that we act like we don't care about anybody else. And the real goal of emotional sobriety, emotional recovery, is to somehow stay in the middle of that bed so that we are balancing our desire to please and cooperate with our desire to honor ourselves and our individuality. When we do that, Monty, we become truly sincere with ourselves. When we can honor both sides of who we are and balance those two things, that's the definition of being sincere with yourself.
Let me ask you a question that has been posed to me about some of the things that we've discussed on this show. And this is a perfect segue into this question. And I have my opinion about this. I want to see what yours is. I was asked by 3 separate listeners, and they all asked it in a different way, but they were all saying the same thing. These things that we do to help us unhook from emotional dependency on other people, so we, that we do to be okay with ourselves. Is this something that we are going to have to learn to participate in for the rest of our lives? So
let me see if I understand this question. So They're asking, is this something I'm going to have to work on the rest of my life?
Yeah.
Yeah, and the answer to that is yes. See, that's why this is an ongoing effort, right?
Right.
I mean, we don't ever get on top of this. We can, what do we say? We strive for spiritual progress, not spiritual perfection.
Sure.
Well, the same thing is true here.
Yeah.
We strive for emotional maturity, not emotional perfection. We're never going to get that way where we're totally on top of this and stay balanced all the time, and we're never going to get upset. The issue becomes not, are we going to get upset, but how do we deal with it when we are? Mm-hmm. How do we cope with these things when that does happen? So that's the big issue for me, is in terms of being able to deal with the feelings that I have that come up in a way that gets me back to being balanced.
And I agree, because of our human structure, because we are imperfect, and because we're always growing. Hopefully, if we're in recovery, it's an ongoing process. It's like it's like we have to die to ourselves daily, our false self. We have to renew daily, because when I may go to bed tonight and just be on top of the world, and man, I can stand on my own 2 feet. I've had a great day, and I know how to be properly dependent on a power greater than myself, recognize who I truly am, so I can be truly independent in a healthy way,
right.
And then wake up in the morning,
right.
And before I look myself in the mirror, I'm already thinking things that are not healthy.
Yeah, yep, there you go.
And so I have to practice this on a daily basis. And I don't know about you, Dr. Berger, but when I get, what they call it, resting on your laurels, when I, kind of back up from my vigilance, mm-hmm. I'm kind of setting myself up for some pretty emotional, tragic days.
Mm-hmm. I hear you, man.
Yeah.
That's that challenge we all have to stay balanced, isn't it?
It is.
How do I do that? How do I, keep my center of gravity within myself?
Mm-hmm.
I keep talking about that over and over again, is that the thing we want to do is we want to keep our center of gravity within and not give it away to other people. Because as soon as I put my center of gravity in you, now you control my life.
Yeah.
I've lost control.
Yeah, and I want to encourage those who are listening that are like, oh man, I've got to work on this every day. Well, listen, there are certain things we do every day that we've gotten used to that are part of our lives. We get up in the morning, there's a certain ritual we go through, we brush our teeth, we comb our hair. Well, you and I don't comb our hair. But we do certain things. We prepare for our day. We have structure. We at 2:45, I know I have to at 2:30, I need to get ready to go pick up my son from high school. I mean, things that we make a part of our lives because they are so important. Why not take these wonderful tools and do the same thing with them and make them a regular part of our everyday living?
Yeah, I like it, man.
Yeah, right on. Right on, buddy. All right. Good. Another great show. So next show, we're going to be going even further into the steps.
We're going to keep working through the steps here. Let me just say one more thing before we wrap here so I can make well, you know what? Let's do this. Let's pick up step 4 again, because there's a few more things I want to say about step 4, because it's so rich. Because this is where we start to do that emotional inventory and start to get honest with ourselves and take a look at how we're actually reacting. So let's pick up step 4 again, Monty, when we come to the show again in 2 weeks.
Okay, sounds great. Well, my friends, don't forget, Dr. Berger's email is right here on this webpage. If you're listening on your smartphone and it's really tiny on your screen, his email address is abphd, that stands for Alan Berger, PhD, at msn.com. And Dr. Berger, is it too early to make a mention about this wonderful website that you and Dan Griffin have put together?
No, we can mention that. It's what would Ben tell you if you weren't busy watching television? And we have 2 doors, so men can go in one door,
and women in
Dan
the
and I talk about certain things for the men in the one door, and then you can go in the door for women, and Dan and I talk about certain messages that we want to share with women. And this is, while Dan and I are writing our book on this topic, we do have a CD available that's available on iTunes, and that's also available on Amazon, and you can order it through our website.
And we'll have
it's very exciting. And let me mention this, too.
Yeah.
I said this on the last show, but through the end of this year, Hazelton has been very, very generous and has extended the promotion that if you buy all 3 of my books, 12 Stupid Things That Mess Up Recovery, 12 Smart Things to Do When the Booze and Drugs Are Gone, which is all about emotional sobriety, in my new book, which is The 12 Hidden Rewards of Making Amends, where I talk about the therapeutic value of all the steps and what specifically that therapeutic value is for each step. If you buy all 3 of those and you use the promo code Berger20, you get 20% off of your purchase.
Berger20, B-E-R.
Berger20.
20. We'll put that on the website so that people will remember.
And I think I've got a postcard I can send you, so maybe we can even post that.
All right, that sounds awesome. All right. Another great show. Folks, don't forget to rewind this, play it again. You can see it on YouTube. I mean, it makes it really easy for you to watch it on your smartphone or your tablet. You can download it to your hard drive or your smartphone. You can play it on the play button, the MP3 stream. We're on LinkedIn. We're on Facebook. We're on Twitter. We're on Google+. Oh, my gosh. What else can we do? So we are available and here for you to listen. There is a archive page of this show right below the play button. You'll see archives of this show, and click on that. You can listen to all the other shows that Dr. Berger has been so gracious to come aboard and share. Really, just a wealth of wonderful tools and information for us to help us to unhook from emotional dependency on other people and their behaviors, to be okay with ourselves. And it's okay to do that. To learn to stand on your own 2 feet. It's good stuff. So until our next broadcast, this is the Monty Man along with Dr. Alan Berger. We're wishing serenity for you. Bye-bye.
This has been a broadcast of KHLT Recovery Broadcasting.